Today I'm building this small cabinet. We're gonna have wood on wood drawers, we're gonna have wood on plastic drawers, we're gonna be having some dowel construction, and we're gonna be using a vertical raised panel bit. So this is a traditional double pedestal desk, and you know, these typically come with drawers all over the place because they have the pedestals that support the top. But a motorized desk, because it has to be able to go up and down, does not have these pedestals, and so you lose out on all that storage. And I want to fix that. These are the desk motorized legs, which I have to work around, so they won't be super wide drawers. So what I did is I stacked a few boxes here, and then I just left them here for actually a couple of months while I worked and I sat and I got used to them being there, so I made sure they weren't going to get in the way of my legs or my working position. And then I used these as the dimensions for when I made my plans. I started at the table saw, ripping my plywood down to 23 inches in width. That's for the two sides and the top and the bottom. The desk is deeper than that. I could have something that's deeper than 23 inches. However, when you're working with a 4x8 chunk of plywood, it just makes for more efficient use of materials to keep it under 24 inches. So as I mentioned, the cabinet itself is going to be painted. However, I will be putting walnut on the front of the cabinet to match the desk. So for the sides of the top, this is the top, I'm going to put on some iron-on edge banding because I think it will just give a nicer surface for painting. I next mounted my dado blade in the saw, and I took some test cuts to make sure it would fit the plywood width. For setting the blade, I used a caliper, and then I used some playing cards for shims, and with that I was able to get a nice snug fit on my dado. I made a mark 2.5 inches in to mark out the feet, and then I traced a can to get a nice curve. I put a tape on the back of the plywood to protect the veneer. And I took out my splitter and I lowered my table saw blade, and I measured to 2 inches to this side of the blade, which lines up here. And then I'm just bringing the piece in here, and I'm going to raise the blade up, and that will cut the straight part of the cut. I'll then use the bandsaw to cut the curve, though a jigsaw would work here also. So in the interest of full disclosure, I did raise the saw blade up a bit too high when I was cutting, so I have this little notch here, but fortunately this is at the bottom, and I will try to position this at the back of the cabinet. And man, did my dado blade chew up the veneer when it was cross-cutting into the side of the panel here. This is the inside of the cabinet. It'll be almost never seen, but I'm not really happy about that. I took some of the scrap plywood and I ripped it down to 2 inches, and then I drilled pocket holes and made a frame that will fit in for each of the two drawers. Let's put it together. So a bit more of that full disclosure thing. I hadn't quite planned on this many screws, but I guess I didn't test the dado properly, so the middle part of the cabinet was not seating fully into the dado, so I had to get busy with some clamps, and then thought I better just go ahead and put in a few screws. Again, it's going under my desk. It's going to be painted, and it's not really going to be visible, these parts. And I'll plug all the holes, and I'll show you that later. And then I just had to plug umpteen bazillion holes. For years I used flush cutting saws to take care of plugs, and they work. But they are time consuming and they can scratch the veneer. What I've now switched to is using the palm router. I've added a sub base, and you see the notch out the front, and then here you have a flush cutting bit, and you have that set to be just a hair higher than that. That just takes it off in no time, and then you just come back with some sand with the random orbit sander. So the basic carcass is pretty much done, and I don't think I mentioned that I'm pretty much doing found materials for this project. The cabinet itself was from a leftover piece of 4x4 plywood from a previous project. This is some maple bookshelves that I picked up off the street on trash day, and I've taken that apart, and that's going to be the drawers, and this is the plywood backing from that old shelf. That's going to be the drawer bottoms. And the back of the cabinet, I have this old piece of oak 1/8 inch, I think it's a door skin that I inherited from my dad years ago, and I'm going to use that to make the back of the cabinet. So I'm making simple boxes for my drawers, and you'll notice that the ends are sticking out. That's a tip I picked up from John Peters a few years ago. Since I'm not using mechanical drawer slides, I want to be able to open the drawer, and you'll see now the back of the drawer will open, and the drawer is supported by the parts that stick out so that it doesn't fall down. The plywood bottoms are just going to be attached to the bottom, but as you recall, these are pre-finished, and it's got this nice finish on which I want on the inside of the drawer, but then that's not going to stick when I glue it. So I've clamped a bar here that's 1/2 inch in the width of the drawer side, and I'm going to try either with a chisel or maybe with some sandpaper to strip off the finish, so just where the drawer body is going to be. Oh, that's a hard finish. I think I might try sandpaper. There's some nice bare wood for glue. So about 5-10 minutes of sanding, and I've got this weird looking pattern which now will fit nicely on my drawer. So I glued the drawers and I pinned them, and then I'm going to add some dowels to reinforce the joints. I'm not using mechanical drawer slides, I'm just using wood on wood for the drawers, and that's fine for these top drawers. But this bottom drawer is a much bigger drawer, and it's going to be a bit heavier, so I was a bit worried about that. And so what I hit on is I'm going to put down some slippery plastic for the drawer to slide on. Now you can buy rolls of slippery plastic tape. It's called WnW tape, and you can buy it at Lee Valley or probably Amazon. I'll put some links to it down below. But what I did is I happened to have a chunk of plastic that a friend of mine had given me, so I sliced out 2 runners, and I'm going to put them in the drawer here, in the cabinet here, for the drawer to slide upon. I don't want the drawers to get caught on the screws, so I'm going to countersink them fairly deeply into the plastic. And then with that, the drawer fits like this. It slides quite nice. I mean, these slide fairly well too, but this is a big drawer. Like the small drawers, I have the back extending pretty much to the end of the cabinet, so that'll support it when you have it fully extended. So about this big drawer, I purposefully built it big enough so that it can hold file folders. Whether I'll put them in there or not is another matter. And then to support the file folders, I made these pieces of walnut where I cut a notch along the top. There's going to be one at each end. I'm using walnut because it's a hardwood and because it looks nice. And I'm using screws to attach it, so we have the ability to take it out in the future with no fuss. I'm putting my box cutting blade on because it makes a nice flat cut. I'm going to set it to about 1/8 inch in height. And I'm doing that because while I'm painting the cabinet, I'm planning to put walnut on the front of the cabinet for the drawer faces and for trim around the edge. And I was thinking, rather than having this black and then have the walnut up against it like that, I want to cut a little, like maybe 1/8 of an inch wide shadow line. I'm not even sure how to visualize it right now without actually having it cut, but I see it in my head. And I'm going to run the cabinet over the blade, and it'll put a little 1/8 by 1/8 inch groove. So it's going to look something like that. All right, I'm committed now. I'm going to put 1 or 2 coats of black paint on the cabinet, and then we can move on to the walnut face frames. I'm going to mask off this front edge so doesn't get in the way of gluing later. And of course I'm not going to make you watch me paint that because that's boring and everybody's going to click away from the video. So in another second or so, you're going to see it finished. So there, that's what I was visualizing. A little shadow line between the walnut and the carcass. So with the edge banding in place, the final thing to work on is the drawer faces. And for that I've prepared this walnut plank. I glued up 3 boards together to make it, and it's about 5/8, a little bit more than 5/8 of an inch thick. And one thing I want to mention is these 3 boards and these edge trim pieces, they all came out of the same single walnut plank. So I'm really hoping that they should all have a consistent color when it's all done. So bottom drawer, middle drawer, top drawer. I got 3 pieces ready. And now I'm bringing them to the router table to give them a raised panel look to them. The table right next to them has drawers where the face looks kind of like that, and I thought it would be good to match them even though it's walnut versus mahogany. So then I have this router bit that I picked up at Lee Valley. I'll put in a little close-up of it. It's got a straight part here at the bottom and then an angled part and then another lip here at the top. And the idea is it will be buried in the fence, and then just that part will be sticking out. And of course I've done some test cuts, and that's telling me that I need to do this in at least 2 passes, especially where you're cutting along the end grain. The bit is really laboring to get through it when I tried it doing it full depth, so do not want to mess this up. So that's the first pass. Now I need to loosen the fence and move it a bit farther. And anyway, I put a pencil here. I drew a pencil mark on the top when I was doing my test passes so that I would have it in the exact same position. One more test piece. And there we go, that turned out great. And you know, lots of sanding. For fastening on the drawer front, I piled up some wood until I got the face at the right height, and then I used a spacer so that it's 1/2 inches out, and then I've got it clamped tightly in place. And then I will drill and put in some mounting holes, and once I get a couple of them in, then we can get on with it. Then we got to make sure. For the smaller drawers, 2 screws will be enough, but for this one I'll need to put some more screws in the bottom. But once I have those 2 in, I can take it out and work on it out in the open where it's much easier. For the next drawer, I'm using a steel ruler to give me the thickness I need. And then the same thing for the top drawer. For the drawer pulls, I have these pewter pulls that I got from Lee Valley. I've used these on a few of my projects and I like the style, so I'm sticking with consistent style. The one thing that you sometimes will have to do when you're making your own drawers is you might need to buy more screws, because these are designed for fairly thin drawer fronts. So I don't think they're going to fit here, but I have longer screws. So since I've used this hardware before, maybe it's no surprise that I happen to still have a jig that I built for drilling the holes for mounting these pulls on a drawer. And it's really just a simple L bracket with some carefully measured holes and a center mark. And for instance, if this was your drawer front, you would clamp this to the front of the drawer, and then you can just drill through these two holes, and then you would have a perfectly positioned set of mounting holes for the pull. I have some longer bolts, but they might be too long. We shall see. Yeah, my bolts are just a little bit too long, but you get the idea. So they'll look like that. Now, I'll work on cutting these bolts shorter and getting them all installed. Yeah, I got into finishing and I forgot to turn the camera on. Here we go, waking up the walnut. I'm using my standard oil modified water-based polyurethane. In part, this is going to match the desk, and that's what I used on that desk. Hope this is going to look okay. The black and the walnut, I guess it did on the desk, so it should look okay here too. And after letting it dry overnight, I sanded it with 240 grit, wiped off the dust, and put on a second coat. So I used polyurethane on the walnut. On the drawers, I used a seal coat of shellac, partly because I just wanted a light, clear coat, but also because I don't actually know what finish is on this recycled plywood that I was using for the bottom, and shellac is sort of that universal coat that'll stick to anything. So I'm not planning to put it on the bottom, but you know, I know some of it's going to get onto the bottom as I do the insides. And with everything back together, here we have the finished project. This was a fun build. It's great to do custom furniture that fits exactly the need you want. So I used mostly reclaimed materials. It's narrow, so it fits the space that I've got. I'm using the same hardware that I have on other pieces. I have matched the drawers to the other desk with the raised panel. Wood on wood drawers are simple to use, and yet, you know, with a little bit of ingenuity, you add plastic runners for this big and heavy drawer. And by not using mechanical slides, you've gained an inch of width of storage space in your drawers. So there you go. A lot of different little techniques I used in building this. I hope you found it interesting and enjoyable. If you like this project, maybe check out the video where I built the desk that goes with it, or I have also a playlist of all kinds of other furniture projects that I built over the years. Okay guys, we'll see you next time. And if you stuck around right to the end, you get to see it installed under the desk.